The key turned uselessly in my hand. Someone had changed the locks on my childhood home. I stood on the porch at 8:15 on a Saturday morning, my father's original key dangling from my fingers like a broken promise. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I could see shadows moving inside. They knew I was here. They were choosing not to open the door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I pulled out my phone and did what any rational person would do. I called a locksmith. 20 minutes, the dispatcher promised. I sat on the porch steps, the same steps my father had rebuilt by hand when I was 12, waiting. The neighborhood was waking up around me. Mr. Kowalski next door was retrieving his newspaper. He waved, then hesitated, seeing me sitting outside instead of going in. His expression shifted to something between concern and recognition, like he'd been expecting this moment. The locksmith's van pulled up at 8:35. A young guy, maybe 25, with a tool belt and a clipboard. Before he could reach the porch, the front door swung open. Greg Paulson filled the doorway, his face already red with the kind of rage that comes preloaded, needing only the slightest excuse to detonate. He wasn't a large man, but he carried himself like he owned everything his eyes touched. In this case, he thought he did. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice carried across the quiet street. Several neighbors stopped their morning routines to watch. I stood slowly, deliberately. "Getting into my house, Greg." The house my father left to my mother and me. The locksmith glanced between us, his hand moving instinctively toward his phone. "Sir, if there's a dispute about property ownership, I can't proceed without proper documentation." "There's no dispute." Greg stepped onto the porch. "This is my house. My wife's house. And this ungrateful brat has no right to be here. I have every right." I pulled out my phone, showing the locksmith a photo of the original deed. "My name is on the property records. I've lived here for 24 years before leaving for college. This man married my mother 6 years ago and apparently thinks that erases legal ownership." The locksmith shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I really think this is a matter for the courts. I'm going to have to leave." "Smart choice." Greg's smirk was poisonous. "Now get off my property, Sarah. Both of you. I'm not leaving. Not until I collect my belongings from the garage workshop. Items that belong to me, that my father left specifically to me." "Your father's dead." Greg stepped closer, his breath already carrying the sweet chemical smell of vodka mixed with orange juice. "Been dead 8 years. Anything in this house is ours now. Community property. That's not how inheritance law works." I kept my voice level, aware that Mr. Kowalski was now standing in his driveway, phone in hand. "And you know it, which is why you changed the locks last week when Mom mentioned I was coming to visit." The locksmith backed toward his van. "I'm leaving. You folks need to sort this out legally." As he drove away, Greg's expression transformed from performative anger to something genuinely dangerous. "You cost me $200 for that lock change. You're going to pay me back, and then you're going to disappear back to Seattle and stop poisoning your mother against me. Where is Mom?" "None of your business. Actually, it's very much my business when you're isolating her from her family. I tried calling her cell yesterday. It went straight to voicemail. Tried the landline. Disconnected. She doesn't want to talk to you." Greg moved faster than I expected, grabbing my wrist. "Now get the hell off this porch before I remove you myself. Let go of me." His grip tightened, twisting slightly. "You think you can just show up here after 6 years of barely calling, barely visiting, and make demands? You abandoned this family. I moved for college. That's not abandonment. That's called having a life. You left your mother alone when she needed you most. After your dad died, you couldn't wait to run away." The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth I'd spent years trying to bury. I had left. Fled, really, to Seattle and a tech job and an apartment that didn't echo with my father's absence. But I'd stayed in touch. Called weekly. Visited on holidays until Greg made those visits so unbearable I'd started making excuses. The last time I'd been inside this house was 3 years ago, for Christmas. Greg had gotten drunk and made comments about my career, my clothes, my lack of a husband. Mom had apologized in whispered phone calls afterward but never actually confronted him. Let go of my wrist, Greg. Or what? You'll call the cops? Tell them the big bad stepfather won't let you steal from your own mother? I'm not stealing. I'm collecting what's legally mine. My father's tools. The renovation journals. My art portfolio from high school. Things Mom agreed I could pick up this weekend. That was before she realized you were coming here to cause trouble. Greg's face was inches from mine now. She doesn't want you here. I don't want you here. This is our house, our life. You're not part of it anymore. From inside, I heard movement. A door closing. Footsteps retreating deeper into the house. Mom was home. Mom was listening to this. And she wasn't coming to the door. The realization hit harder than any physical blow could have. Mom, I called toward the house. Mom, please. I just want to talk. Silence. She's done with you. Greg released my wrist and shoved me backward. I stumbled down 2 steps before catching myself on the railing. Not hard enough to injure, but deliberate enough to make his point. Get out. Don't come back. If I see you on this property again, I'm calling the police for trespassing. I steadied myself, my tech project manager brain already shifting into documentation mode. My phone had been recording in my pocket since the locksmith arrived. I had witnesses. I had evidence. And I had something Greg didn't know about yet. I had my father's lawyer on speed dial, the woman who'd helped draft his will and knew exactly what provisions he'd included for this exact scenario. Fine. I walked backward down the steps, keeping my eyes on Greg. I'll go. But this isn't over. Yes, it is. He went back inside and slammed the door. Through the window, I saw him twist the new deadbolt home with theatrical emphasis. I stood in the driveway for a long moment, staring at the house where I'd learned to ride a bike, where my father had taught me to mix tile grout and place mosaic pieces, where every room held some fragment of our family's history. The morning sun caught the living room window at an angle, and I could see through the shears that someone had painted over the accent wall. The wall where my father had installed a custom tile mural of Mount Hood, each piece hand-cut and placed over 3 months. 10 years of work, just painted over like it had never existed. Mr. Kowalski approached cautiously. Sarah? You all right? I got that on video if you need it. He held up his phone. Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. That would help a lot. He's been getting worse. Your mom, she's not the same. Hardly comes outside anymore. Greg's got her convinced the whole neighborhood is judging her. He transferred the video to my phone. I probably should have said something sooner, but your mom insisted everything was fine. It's not your responsibility. But thank you for looking out for her. Your dad was a good man. Best neighbor I ever had. What Greg's doing to that house, to those renovations Michael spent years on, it's criminal. He paused. Literally criminal, I think. Pretty sure I saw him ripping out tile work from the bathroom last month. Loading it into a truck. My stomach dropped. Which bathroom? The master. The one with the blue and white Portuguese tile pattern your dad imported. That tile had been my father's masterpiece. Custom ordered from a small artisan in Lisbon, installed piece by painstaking piece over 8 months. It was worth thousands, but its real value was in the hundreds of hours my father had invested, the artistry he'd poured into creating something beautiful for my mother. Did you see where he took it? Pawn shop on Highway 22, I think. I didn't follow, but I've seen his truck parked there before. I thanked Mr. Kowalski again and walked to my rental car, parked across the street. Inside, with the doors locked and the morning sun warming through the windshield, I allowed myself exactly 2 minutes of tears. 2 minutes to mourn what I was seeing clearly for the first time. My mother had traded her first family for the illusion of companionship. Greg had systematically erased my father's memory, sold off his legacy piece by piece, and convinced my mother that this erasure was somehow moving forward instead of simple destruction. Then I dried my eyes, opened my laptop from my bag, and connected to my phone's hotspot. I pulled up the cloud folders where I'd stored everything years ago, back when I was still naive enough to think digital backup was just good practice rather than essential evidence. Photos of every room in the house from my last dozen visits. Copies of the will and property deed my father had given me during his final month. The email chain from 3 years ago where Mom had explicitly agreed I could store items in the garage workshop indefinitely. I made the first call at 9 o'clock to Margaret Chen, the attorney who'd handled my father's estate. Her office didn't open until Monday, but she'd given me her cell number years ago with instructions to use it if I ever needed help with anything related to the property. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm with recognition and concern when I explained the situation. Sarah, how fast can you get to Portland? My office, not the courthouse. Bring every photo, every document, every piece of evidence you have. I'm 2 hours away. Make it 90 minutes. We've got work to do, and we need to move before Greg realizes he's made a massive legal mistake. I started the engine and pulled away from Birch Lane, watching the house shrink in my rearview mirror. The craftsman bungalow my father had saved from demolition and lovingly restored now looked wounded, its shutters hanging crooked, the yard overgrown, the paint beginning to peel. Greg's truck sat in the driveway like a predator guarding its kill, covered in contractor logos for a business that didn't exist. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your mother wants you to know she's fine and asks that you respect her marriage by staying away. This is her choice. Greg. I deleted it without responding and merged onto the highway toward Portland, my mind already cataloging everything I needed to tell Margaret. The changed locks. The assault. The sold tile work. The disconnected phone lines. The isolation tactics. The systematic destruction of my father's craftsmanship. Greg Paulson had no idea what he'd started. He thought he was dealing with the grief-stricken 18-year-old who'd fled to college 8 years ago. Instead, he was about to face a senior software engineer who'd spent her entire career managing complex projects, documenting every detail, and systematically solving problems that seemed insurmountable. My father had taught me to measure twice and cut once, to plan thoroughly before acting, to build things that would last. Greg was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Some foundations can't be destroyed by parasites, no matter how hard they try. Some legacies are protected by more than sentiment. And some daughters come home ready to fight. Margaret Chen's office occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated warehouse in Portland's Pearl District. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Willamette River, and the space had the organized efficiency of someone who'd spent 30 years winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. She met me at the elevator, already reading through documents on her tablet. You weren't exaggerating. She gestured me toward a conference room where another woman sat with a laptop and scanner. This is paralegal Rebecca Torres. She's going to help us build your timeline while we talk strategy. I spread my laptop, phone, and a flash drive across the table. Everything's here. Property deed with my name listed as co-owner. Dad's will specifying his tool collection and workshop contents belong to me. Email chains with Mom agreeing to storage. Photos of the house from every visit over the past 8 years showing the systematic destruction of Dad's renovation work. And video from this morning of Greg assaulting me. Margaret's expression hardened as she watched the footage. He shoved you down the steps after a verbal altercation where you were attempting to access property you legally co-own. And you have a witness who filmed it independently. Mr. Kowalski next door. He also mentioned seeing Greg remove custom tile work from the house and transport it to a pawn shop on Highway 22. Rebecca looked up from her laptop. Portuguese tile? Blue and white pattern? That's the one. How did you know? Because I helped your father order it. Margaret's voice was quiet. Michael and I went to law school together before I switched careers and he went into craftsmanship. I was at your house when those tiles arrived from Lisbon. He spent 3 days just planning the layout before installing the first piece. The room felt suddenly smaller, compressed by the weight of what had been lost. My father's friendships, his careful artistry, his decades of work, all of it dismissed and destroyed by a man who couldn't see past the immediate cash value of things that were actually priceless. We need to understand the full scope before we act. Margaret pulled up a legal pad. Walk me through everything, starting with when Greg entered your mother's life. I recounted it methodically, the way I'd learned to present project timelines at work. My father died 8 years ago in a car accident on Highway 26, hit by a drunk driver on his way home from a tile installation job in Beaverton. Mom was 51, suddenly widowed, grieving, and terrified of being alone in the house they'd spent 20 years renovating together. For the first 2 years, she seemed okay. I visited monthly, called twice a week, helped her navigate the insurance settlements and estate paperwork. Margaret had handled most of the legal work, ensuring the house transferred to Mom with me listed as co-owner per Dad's wishes, a protection he'd insisted on because he wanted me to always have a claim to our family home. Then Mom started mentioning Greg. They'd met at a grief support group at the community center, though I later learned Greg had never actually lost anyone, he just attended those groups looking for vulnerable women. He was attentive, helpful, always available to fix things around the house. Within 6 months, they were dating. Within a year, they were married at the courthouse with just 2 witnesses, neither of them family. The changes started slowly. Greg began making comments about the house feeling like a museum to my father. He suggested updates and modernizations. Mom resisted at first, but Greg was persistent and persuasive. He convinced her that moving forward meant letting go of the past, that keeping everything exactly as my father had left it was unhealthy, that she was living in a shrine instead of a home. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until I came home for Thanksgiving 3 years ago. The custom tile backsplash in the kitchen had been covered with peel and stick subway tile from a hardware store. Dad's workshop in the garage had been emptied of tools, transformed into what Greg called his man cave, complete with a big screen television and a beer refrigerator. When I asked about the tools, Greg said he'd organized them, put them in storage to make better use of the space. Mom backed him up, her voice uncertain but loyal. That was the last time I'd stayed overnight at the house. I'd started making excuses after that, shortening visits, staying at hotels when I did come to Riverside. The phone calls with Mom became strained. She'd ask why I never wanted to visit anymore, and I'd make vague comments about work being busy. The truth was I couldn't stand watching Greg systematically erase my father's legacy while Mom stood by and let it happen. Rebecca had been typing rapidly, organizing everything into a chronological document. When did you first realize he was selling items from the house? About 2 years ago. I was searching online for tile patterns similar to Dad's work, thinking about having something made for my apartment. I found a listing on Craigslist for Portuguese tiles, blue and white geometric pattern, authentic import. The photos showed tiles that looked identical to the ones from the guest bathroom. I called the number in the listing. It was a pawn shop in Salem. They said they'd bought a collection of tiles from a man named Greg Paulson. Did you confront him? I called Mom. She said I must be mistaken, that Greg would never sell anything without asking her. She said the guest bathroom tiles were still there, just fine. I let it drop because I didn't want to believe she was lying to protect him. I thought maybe I'd been wrong about the tiles. But you weren't wrong. Margaret pulled up something on her tablet. I did some preliminary research before you arrived. There are multiple listings across various resale platforms for custom tile work, antique tools, and craftsman furniture, all traced back to sellers in the Riverside area. If we can connect these sales to Greg, we're looking at theft of your property and potentially conversion of marital assets without your mother's informed consent. The term conversion sounded so clinical for what was actually happening, which was the deliberate destruction of my father's life's work, the theft of my inheritance, the manipulation of my mother into complicity. There's more. I opened a folder on my laptop. 2 months ago, I got curious and ran a property record search. Greg filed a quitclaim deed last year attempting to transfer the house entirely into his name. It was rejected by the county because my name is on the title and I didn't sign off. But he tried. Rebecca stopped typing. He attempted to steal the house out from under both of you. And when that didn't work, he changed the locks. Margaret made a note. That's when he shifted from slowly eroding your access to actively preventing it. He knows time is running out. He's probably planning to force a sale or find another way to remove you from the title. Can he do that? Not legally, but he can make life difficult enough that you might be tempted to sign away your interest just to be done with it. That's the play here. Harassment, isolation, making it impossible for you to actually exercise your ownership rights. She looked at me directly. How committed are you to fighting this? All the way. Whatever it takes. Good, because this is going to get ugly. Greg has already shown he's willing to use physical intimidation. Your mother is going to be caught in the middle, and she may choose his side over yours, at least initially. You need to be prepared for that possibility. I already know she will. She didn't come to the door this morning. She let him shove me down the steps and said nothing. The hurt in my voice was audible, and I hated it. I wanted to sound professional, detached, strategic. Instead, I sounded like exactly what I was, which was a daughter grieving the loss of her mother to a con artist's manipulations. Margaret's expression softened. Your mother is a victim here too, even if she doesn't see it yet. Our job is to protect her interests as well as yours, whether she thanks us for it or not. We spent the next 3 hours building the case. Rebecca organized every photo, every email, every document into a comprehensive timeline. Margaret outlined our legal strategy, which would involve multiple simultaneous actions. First, an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against Greg based on this morning's assault, with the video evidence making it nearly impossible for him to contest. Second, a demand for an accounting of all marital assets and any sales or transfers that had occurred since the marriage. Third, a formal notice that I was exercising my ownership rights and would be accessing the property to secure my personal belongings and document the condition of my father's renovation work. We'll file everything Monday morning. Margaret closed her laptop. The restraining order should be granted within 48 hours. That will keep Greg away from you and, crucially, away from the house while we investigate what he sold and where the money went. What about Mom? Will she be allowed to stay in the house? Yes, but Greg won't. And Sarah, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that she'll choose to leave with him rather than stay without him. Some people would rather maintain a toxic relationship than face the fear of being alone. I nodded, understanding the truth of it even as I hoped my mother would prove to be stronger than that. There's one more thing. Rebecca pulled up a document on her screen. I did some background research on Greg Paulson while you two were talking. He's been married twice before. Both marriages ended in divorce, both ex-wives filed restraining orders, and both cases involved disputes over property and assets. He has a pattern of targeting widows and divorcees, moving in quickly, isolating them from family, and systematically draining their resources. So he's a professional. I felt oddly relieved by this information. It meant my mother hadn't simply fallen for a charming man who turned out to be flawed. She'd been deliberately targeted by someone who made a living exploiting grieving women. Exactly. Margaret's voice was grim. Which means he's done this before and knows how to work the system. But it also means his exes might be willing to testify about his patterns of behavior. That could be valuable if this goes to trial. I left Margaret's office at 2 in the afternoon with a plan, a legal team, and a stack of documents to review and sign. The restraining order paperwork would be filed first thing Monday morning. In the meantime, I was under strict instructions not to return to the house or attempt any contact with Greg or my mother. Any communication would go through Margaret's office to ensure everything was documented and legally sound. I drove back to Riverside slowly, taking the scenic route along the river, trying to process everything. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from unknown numbers, all variations on the same theme. Your mother wants you to leave her alone. Stop harassing this family. You're not welcome here. I forwarded each one to Rebecca, who responded with crisp professional acknowledgement. Each text was evidence of harassment, each message a gift in the form of documented intimidation. Instead of going to the house, I checked into the Riverside Inn, a small hotel downtown that catered mostly to traveling salespeople and families visiting the community college. My room overlooked Main Street, and from the window, I could see the tile shop where my father used to buy supplies. It had new owners now, but the sign still read Riverside Tile and Stone in the same font my father had helped design. I ordered takeout and spent the evening on my laptop, building my own comprehensive documentation to supplement what Rebecca was compiling. I went through 8 years of photos, organizing them into categories. Kitchen before and after. Bathrooms before and after. Living room before and after. Each comparison showed the same pattern of destruction disguised as improvement. Custom tile work covered or removed. Built-in furniture replaced with cheap alternatives. Carefully restored hardwood floors covered with laminate. My father's artistry systematically erased and replaced with whatever Greg could buy quickly from big box stores. Around 9, my phone rang. An Oregon number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. Sarah? It's Tom. Your uncle. Your father's brother. Uncle Tom. I hadn't spoken to him in at least 2 years. We drifted apart after my father died, the way extended families often do when the person connecting them is gone. I heard what happened this morning. Mr. Kowalski called me. He thought someone from the family should know. I filled him in on the basics, the changed locks, the assault, the legal action I was taking. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, his response was immediate. I'm driving up tomorrow. You shouldn't be handling this alone. You don't have to do that. Your father was my best friend before he was my brother. What Greg's doing to his house, to his work, it's not just theft. It's desecration. I want to help. After we hung up, I felt something shift inside me. The isolation that had defined the past 6 years, the sense that I was the only one who remembered or cared about my father's legacy, was beginning to crack. Mr. Kowalski had documented the assault. Margaret and Rebecca were building the legal case. Uncle Tom was driving up from Eugene. A support network was forming, people who understood what was at stake beyond just property and money. I fell asleep reviewing photos of my father's tile work, each image a reminder of why this fight mattered. These weren't just decorative elements. They were love letters written in ceramic and grout, my father's way of showing his family that beauty and permanence were possible, that care and attention could create something that would outlast any individual life. Greg had seen those creations and seen only dollar signs. He'd ripped them out and sold them to pawn shops, converting years of artistry into beer money and gambling stakes. Tomorrow, Uncle Tom would arrive. Monday, Margaret would file the paperwork. And soon, very soon, Greg Paulson would learn what happened when you tried to erase someone who'd spent his whole life building things designed to last forever. Some legacies are carved too deep to be destroyed by parasites, no matter how hard they try. Uncle Tom arrived at the hotel Sunday morning with coffee and a folder thick with papers. He looked older than I remembered, his hair more gray than brown now, but his eyes had the same sharp focus my father's had possessed. We sat in the breakfast area while the Sunday crowd filtered through for continental waffles and fruit cups. I pulled the property records going back 20 years. Tom spread documents across the table. Your father put my name down as an emergency contact on several contractor agreements and warranty documents. I've been getting notices that work has been done on the house, modifications to the original installations. I should have called you sooner. What kind of modifications? Tom showed me inspection reports from the county. Greg had pulled permits for bathroom renovations, kitchen updates, structural changes to the garage. Each permit listed him as the homeowner, no mention of my mother's name or mine. The work had been approved and completed over the past 3 years, all of it erasing my father's craftsmanship and replacing it with contractor-grade mediocrity. This is fraud. I photographed each document. He represented himself as sole owner to get these permits. Worse than that. Tom pointed to one particular inspection report. This permit was for removing a load-bearing wall in the kitchen. The inspector noted that the work was completed without proper engineering assessment. Your father spent 6 months reinforcing that wall properly when he opened up the kitchen. Greg just knocked it out and threw up a beam from the lumber yard. The house could have collapsed. The recklessness was staggering, not just the theft and destruction but the genuine danger Greg had put my mother in by doing structural work without proper knowledge or care. The house my father had meticulously restored and reinforced was now compromised, potentially unsafe, all so Greg could create an open floor plan he'd seen on some home improvement show. We need to get an engineer in there. I made a note on my phone. Document the structural damage before he does anything else. Margaret already thought of that. Tom smiled slightly. I called her last night. She's arranging for a structural engineer to inspect the property as part of the legal proceedings. If there's unsafe work, that gives us grounds for an emergency order to halt any further modifications. My phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. This time it wasn't Greg's usual harassment. It was a photo of my mother standing in the kitchen, looking tired and confused, with text overlay reading, "She doesn't want you here. Stop tearing this family apart." I showed Tom. He's using her as a shield now. Making it seem like she's the one pushing me away. That's classic abuser behavior. Isolate the victim, control the narrative, make it impossible for outside help to reach them. Tom's expression was grim. Your aunt went through something similar with her first husband. It took her family months to break through the manipulation. How did they do it? Patience. Persistence. And they never stopped reminding her that they loved her and the door was always open. Eventually, she found the strength to leave. But it took time. I forwarded the photo to Rebecca with a note about continued harassment. The responses came quickly now, professional acknowledgement followed by a brief update that all evidence was being compiled into a comprehensive file that would be presented to the judge Monday morning. Tom and I spent the rest of the morning driving around Riverside, talking to people who'd known my father. The tile shop owners remembered him fondly and were horrified to learn that his work was being destroyed. They pulled sales records showing that Greg had never purchased tile or proper installation materials, confirming that his renovations were cheap cover-ups rather than quality work. The owner offered to testify if needed. We stopped by the pawn shop on Highway 22, the one Mr. Kowalski had mentioned. The owner was hesitant until Tom explained the situation and showed him photos of my father's original installations. The man's expression shifted from defensive to sympathetic. I bought those tiles from a guy about 6 months ago. Big fellow, always smelled like vodka, said he was a contractor clearing out old inventory. I felt bad for him, gave him a fair price. Had no idea they were stolen from his wife's house. Do you still have them? Sold most of them to a designer in Portland, but I kept a few pieces back. They're in the warehouse. Beautiful work, hand-painted details. I knew they were special. He retrieved a box containing a dozen tiles, each one clearly from my father's Portuguese collection. The glaze patterns matched the photos I had from years ago. I bought them on the spot, paying twice what the pawn shop owner had given Greg, and got a receipt with detailed provenance documentation for Margaret's files. By afternoon, we had testimonies from 3 shop owners, documentation of Greg's fraudulent permit applications, and physical evidence of stolen property. The case was building faster than I'd anticipated, each conversation revealing another layer of Greg's systematic dismantling of my father's legacy. Uncle Tom drove us past the house on Birch Lane. Greg's truck was gone, but my mother's car sat in the driveway. Curtains were drawn. The lawn had grown shaggy, and the garden my father had planted with native Oregon flowers was overrun with weeds. Even from the street, the house looked neglected in a way that went beyond simple maintenance. It looked abandoned by people who actually cared about it. I miss him. Tom's voice was quiet. Your dad, He had this way of seeing potential in broken things. That house was a disaster when they bought it. Foundation issues, electrical problems, roof leaking. Everyone told them to tear it down and start over. But Michael saw what it could be. Spent 20 years turning it into something beautiful. Greg spent 6 years turning it back into a disaster. Not if we can help it. Tom pulled away from the curb. Monday morning, we start putting things right. That evening, I reviewed the restraining order paperwork one final time. Margaret had crafted it carefully, documenting the assault, the harassment texts, the pattern of intimidation, and the immediate threat Greg posed. The order would prohibit him from coming within 500 feet of me and, crucially, would require him to vacate the property at Birch Lane within 24 hours of service. My mother could choose to stay or go, but Greg would be removed. The phone rang just after 9. Margaret's voice was alert despite the late hour. I wanted to give you advance warning. Greg's attorney reached out this afternoon. He's hired Bradley Simmons, local lawyer who specializes in property disputes. Simmons is already trying to negotiate, which tells me Greg knows he's in serious trouble. What's he offering? Full access to your stored property if you agree to sign away your ownership interest in the house. Basically, he gets the house free and clear, you get your father's tools and personal items back, everyone walks away. Absolutely not. That's what I told him. But Sarah, you need to understand what this means. Simmons is good. This is going to get expensive and drawn out. Greg's going to fight every motion, contest every claim, drag your mother through depositions. It could take months or years to fully resolve. I don't care. That house represents everything my father built. I'm not letting Greg profit from destroying it. Good. Because I already have the structural engineer scheduled for Tuesday morning, assuming we get the restraining order approved. I've also filed a motion to compel accounting of all marital assets and property sales. Greg will have to produce documentation for every item he's sold, every modification he's made, every penny he's spent. If he can't, that's evidence of waste and conversion. After we hung up, I sat in the hotel room surrounded by documents and photos, the accumulated evidence of 6 years of systematic theft and destruction. Tomorrow would begin the legal counterattack, the formal process of reclaiming what Greg had stolen and protecting what remained. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had been lost. My father's Portuguese tiles, scattered across pawn shops and private collections. His custom breakfast nook, ripped out and replaced with an island from a big box store. The workshop where he'd taught me to mix grout and read blueprints, converted into Greg's personal entertainment space. My mother's dignity and independence, slowly eroded by a man who saw her only as a means to access property and money. I pulled up photos from my childhood, images of the house in its full glory before my father died. Every room told a story of care and craftsmanship. The living room built-ins where he'd stored his architecture books and my mother's nursing textbooks. The tile backsplash in the kitchen featuring a subtle wave pattern that took him 3 months to perfect. The master bathroom with its Portuguese tile work that made the small space feel like a European villa. Each element was functional and beautiful, designed to last generations. Greg had seen all of that artistry and seen only obstacles to his vision of generic home improvement trends. He'd covered beauty with mediocrity, replaced permanence with disposable materials, traded craftsmanship for convenience. And he'd convinced my mother that this destruction was actually progress, that moving forward required erasing the past. My phone lit up with one final message. This time it was from my mother's actual phone number, the cell I'd been calling for days without response. Sarah, please stop this. Greg made mistakes but he loves me. You're going to destroy our life together. Can't you just let us be happy? I stared at the message for a long time, composing and deleting responses. Finally, I wrote back simply. Mom, I love you. I'm trying to protect you and Dad's legacy. I hope someday you'll understand that. The response came immediately. You never understood. You left when I needed you most. Now you want to control my life. Just stay in Seattle and leave us alone. The accusation stung because it contained fragments of truth twisted into weapons. I had left for Seattle. I had built a life away from Riverside and the grief-soaked house. But leaving for college and career wasn't abandonment. It was survival and growth. The guilt she was wielding was manufactured by Greg, sharpened and aimed at my weakest points. I didn't respond. Margaret had been clear that all communication should go through her office. Instead, I forwarded the messages to Rebecca with timestamps and notes about the continued pressure campaign. Each text was evidence, each manipulation documented for the court. Uncle Tom called one more time before I went to sleep. Just checking on you. Today was a lot. I'm okay. Angry, but okay. Good. Anger is useful if you channel it right. Your father used to say that every problem is just a project waiting for the right approach. We've got the approach now. We've got the team. Tomorrow, we start building the solution. After we hung up, I set my alarm for 5 in the morning. Margaret's office opened at 8, and I wanted to be there when she filed the paperwork. The restraining order would be processed first, hopefully approved by afternoon. Then the real work would begin, the structural inspection, the asset accounting, the systematic documentation of everything Greg had stolen and destroyed. I fell asleep thinking about tile patterns, the way my father used to sketch designs on graph paper before beginning an installation. He'd taught me that every piece mattered, that rushing led to mistakes, that patience and precision created something that would endure. Greg had approached the house like a demolition project, tearing through it with no thought for what came next. But demolition is easy. Building something that lasts requires skill and care and vision. Greg Paulson had torn down my father's life's work. Now I was going to show him what happened when you destroyed something a craftsman's daughter knew how to rebuild. The foundation was still there, damaged but not destroyed. And foundations, properly reinforced, could support structures far stronger than what came before. Monday morning arrived with rain, the kind of steady Oregon drizzle that turns everything gray and makes the world feel smaller. I met Margaret and Rebecca at the courthouse at 7:30, both of them already caffeinated and focused. Uncle Tom joined us in the hallway outside the clerk's office, shaking water from his jacket. The judge assigned to our case was Harold Martinez, a no-nonsense former prosecutor known for cutting through procedural delays. Margaret seemed pleased with the assignment. Martinez doesn't tolerate games. If Greg's lawyer tries to stall or obfuscate, the judge will shut it down fast. We filed the restraining order application at 8 sharp, along with the motion to compel asset accounting and a request for emergency inspection of the property due to structural concerns. The clerk stamped each document with efficient precision, and Margaret handed me copies for my records. Now we wait. The hearing is scheduled for 2 this afternoon. Martinez wants to see both parties and make his determination quickly. What happens if Greg doesn't show? Automatic approval of the restraining order and contempt charges. Margaret checked her watch. Bradley Simmons will make sure he shows. Greg might be reckless, but his lawyer isn't stupid. We reconvened at Margaret's office to prepare for the hearing. Rebecca had compiled a presentation that would make any project manager proud, complete with timeline graphics, photo comparisons, and financial documentation showing the pattern of asset depletion. Uncle Tom provided sworn testimony about the fraudulent permit applications and his knowledge of the structural modifications. Mr. Kowalski sent a video deposition from his phone, documenting not just Saturday's assault but months of concerning behavior he'd witnessed, Greg loading items from the house into his truck at odd hours, arguments audible from next door, my mother's increasing isolation from neighborhood activities. Around noon, Bradley Simmons called Margaret's office. I could hear only her side of the conversation, but her expression told me everything. They were trying to settle before the hearing, offering access to the garage and my stored belongings in exchange for dropping the restraining order and asset accounting demands. My client declines. Margaret's voice was ice. See you in court, Bradley. After she hung up, she turned to me with grim satisfaction. Greg's panicking. Simmons wouldn't be calling with settlement offers if they had any confidence in their position. The assault is on video, the property fraud is documented, and the structural damage creates immediate liability. They've got nothing. The courthouse was crowded when we arrived at 1:30. Family law cases filled the docket, each one a small drama of dissolution and dispute. We waited in the hallway until our case was called, and I caught my first glimpse of Greg in 3 years. He'd aged poorly, his face bloated and red, wearing an ill-fitting suit that screamed rental. Bradley Simmons stood beside him, a slight man with wire-rimmed glasses and the weary expression of someone who knew his client was guilty but had bills to pay. My mother sat on the bench behind them, her hands clutched around her purse, eyes focused on the floor. She looked fragile in a way I'd never seen before, like she'd been hollowed out from the inside. I wanted to go to her, to shake her and ask what happened to the strong woman who'd raised me, the nurse who'd handled trauma and crisis with calm competence. But Greg's presence kept her tethered to his side, invisible chains wrapped tight. Judge Martinez called the courtroom to order precisely at 2. He reviewed the filings quickly, his expression revealing nothing. Counselor Chen, you're alleging assault, property fraud, and structural negligence. That's quite a list. Margaret stood. Your Honor, we have video documentation of the assault, county records showing fraudulent permit applications, and expert testimony regarding unsafe structural modifications. We're requesting a temporary restraining order to protect my client from further intimidation and to prevent additional damage to the property she legally co-owns. Martinez turned to Simmons. Response? Your Honor, this is a family dispute being weaponized by an estranged daughter who abandoned her mother for 6 years and is now attempting to interfere in a lawful marriage. Mr. Paulson denies any assault. The incident on Saturday was a verbal disagreement that became physical only when Miss Bennett refused to leave private property after being asked repeatedly. Let's see the video. Rebecca queued up the footage on the courtroom monitor. The entire sequence played in silence, Greg's aggression clearly visible, my calm responses, the deliberate shove down the steps. Mr. Kowalski's angle captured it from a second perspective, removing any doubt about what had occurred. Martinez watched without comment. When it finished, he looked at Simmons. Your client denied the assault. The video shows otherwise. Would you like to revise your statement? Simmons consulted with Greg in hushed whispers. Your Honor, Mr. Paulson acknowledges that physical contact occurred but maintains it was defensive in nature. Defensive against what? A woman standing on a porch asking to access her own property? Martinez flipped through the deed documentation. Miss Bennett is listed as co-owner. She has legal right to access the residence. Mr. Paulson changed the locks to prevent that access, then assaulted her when she attempted to remedy the situation through legal means by calling a locksmith. Greg leaned forward, trying to speak, but Simmons pushed him back. Your Honor, the property ownership is complex. Mr. Paulson and his wife have been married for 6 years. Community property laws should apply. Not to property Miss Bennett co-owned prior to the marriage. Martinez was losing patience. Counselor, your client attempted to file a quitclaim deed removing Miss Bennett from the title without her consent. That's fraud. He then changed the locks, which is illegal denial of access to a co-owner. And when confronted, he committed assault captured on video from 2 angles. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. Mr. Paulson will vacate the property at 815 Birch Lane within 24 hours and maintain a distance of no less than 500 feet from Miss Bennett. Greg exploded. You can't kick me out of my own house. That's my home, my wife. Martinez's gavel came down hard. Mr. Paulson, you will control yourself or I will hold you in contempt. This is not your house. This is a house you share with a wife who has her own legal interests and a stepdaughter who has ownership rights you've systematically violated. You will comply with this order or you will be removed by the sheriff. My mother made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Greg turned to her, his expression shifting from rage to manipulation in an instant. Diane, tell them. Tell them you want me to stay. She looked up at him, then at me, then at the judge. Her mouth opened but no words came out. The silence stretched until Martinez spoke again. Mrs. Paulson, you're not a party to this restraining order. You may remain in the residence if you choose. However, I'm also granting the motion to compel full accounting of marital assets and property sales conducted during your marriage to Mr. Paulson. You'll need to cooperate with that process. Do you have legal representation? She shook her head mutely. I strongly suggest you obtain counsel. This accounting may reveal financial activities that affect your interests as well. Martinez made a note. I'm also ordering an emergency structural inspection of the property at 815 Birch Lane based on evidence of unpermitted and potentially unsafe modifications. That inspection will occur within 72 hours, and both parties will be provided access to the findings. The hearing concluded with instructions for compliance and a follow-up date set for 2 weeks out. Greg stormed from the courtroom with Simmons trailing behind, trying to calm him. My mother remained seated, staring at her hands. I approached slowly, Margaret beside me. Mom, are you okay? She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears and something that might have been clarity or might have been confusion. I don't understand what just happened. The judge granted a restraining order. Greg has to move out of the house for now. You can stay, but there's going to be an investigation into the property sales and modifications. He said it was our money. That we could do what we wanted with the house. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. Mrs. Paulson, the house isn't solely yours to modify. Your daughter has ownership rights that predate your marriage. And some of the items Mr. Paulson sold may have belonged specifically to Sarah under her father's will. We need to determine exactly what was sold and where that money went. My mother's face crumbled. I didn't know. He handled everything. I just signed what he asked me to sign. That's part of what we need to investigate. Margaret handed her a business card. This is a colleague of mine who specializes in representing spouses in situations like yours. I recommend you call her today. You may need protection too, separate from what Greg wants. After my mother left, supported by a court victim advocate who'd materialized to help her navigate the parking garage, Uncle Tom put his hand on my shoulder. First major victory. The house is secured, Greg is out, and the accounting process will reveal everything he's stolen. We returned to Margaret's office for debriefing. The restraining order would be served by sheriff's deputies within hours. Greg would have until Tuesday afternoon to remove his personal belongings and vacate the property. The structural engineer was scheduled for Wednesday morning. And the asset accounting would begin with subpoenas to every pawn shop, resale store, and online marketplace within a 50-mile radius. The hard part is just starting. Margaret warned. Greg will contest every finding. He'll claim your mother gave permission for everything. He'll argue that marital property laws supersede your ownership interest. And he'll absolutely use your mother's confusion and loyalty to muddy the waters. I know. But now we have the court's backing. We have access to the house. We have the legal authority to investigate. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You've destroyed everything. I hope you're proud of yourself. Taking a man's home, turning his wife against him. You're going to regret this. I showed it to Margaret. She photographed the screen. Forward that to Rebecca. It's a violation of the restraining order before it's even been served. Greg is his own worst enemy. That evening, Uncle Tom and I sat in the hotel restaurant, exhausted but cautiously optimistic. The local news was playing on a television in the bar, and suddenly there was Greg, being interviewed outside the courthouse. The reporter asked about the restraining order, and Greg performed brilliantly for the camera. This is what happens when children abandon their parents and then swoop back in years later trying to control everything. He projected hurt and confusion. My wife and I have built a life together. Her daughter couldn't handle that I wasn't her father, so she's using the legal system to tear our family apart. It's elder abuse, honestly. Using her mother's grief and my wife's kindness against us. The reporter asked about the assault allegation. Greg's expression shifted to wounded innocence. That's completely fabricated. I asked her to leave our property. She became aggressive. I was defending myself and my home. The whole thing is being twisted by expensive lawyers into something it never was. Uncle Tom muted the television. He's good. I'll give him that. He knows exactly how to play the victim. The court has the video. Public opinion doesn't matter. It does if he's trying to poison the jury pool for a potential civil case. He's laying groundwork, creating doubt, making himself sympathetic. My phone rang. Margaret. She'd seen the interview too. I'm filing for a gag order. He's attempting to influence potential witnesses and taint the proceedings. Judge Martinez will shut this down. Will it work? The gag order? Probably. But the damage is done. That interview will be shared, commented on, turned into social media outrage. Greg's betting that public pressure will make you back down. I watched Greg's face frozen on the screen, his expression perfectly calibrated to evoke sympathy. He was good at this, at manipulation and performance. But he'd made one critical error. He'd underestimated how much documentation I had and how willing I was to see this through regardless of public opinion. Let him give all the interviews he wants. I told Margaret. When the structural engineer finds unsafe modifications and the accounting reveals thousands in stolen property, none of his performance will matter. After we hung up, I pulled up my laptop and began drafting an email to the local preservation society. My father's tile work wasn't just family history. It was local craftsmanship worthy of documentation and protection. If I could get the house recognized as having historical significance due to his artisan work, it would add another layer of legal protection against Greg's destruction. Uncle Tom read over my shoulder. Smart. If the house has historical designation, any modifications require approval. Greg's unpermitted work becomes even more problematic. We worked until midnight, building additional layers of protection and documentation. Tomorrow, Greg would be served with the restraining order. Wednesday, the structural inspection would reveal the full extent of the damage. And slowly, methodically, we would piece together exactly what had been stolen and where it had gone. My father had taught me that restoration work required patience. You couldn't rush the process or skip steps without compromising the final result. Greg had torn through the house in 6 years of careless destruction. It might take just as long to document the damage and rebuild properly. But unlike Greg's shortcuts and cheap fixes, what we were building now would last. The legal protections, the historical documentation, the structural repairs, all of it would ensure that my father's legacy was preserved for future generations. Greg thought he could erase Michael Bennett's life's work and replace it with his own mediocre vision. He was about to learn that some things, once built properly, can't be destroyed by men with crowbars and contempt. They can only be protected by daughters who inherited their father's stubbornness along with their skill. The structural engineer arrived Wednesday morning with a clipboard and a laser level. His name was David Chin, and he'd been inspecting Oregon homes for 20 years. Uncle Tom and I met him at the house, where the new locks had been changed again per court order. Greg's belongings were gone, removed during a supervised move-out the previous day. My mother's car was absent. She'd chosen to stay with her sister in Portland while everything was sorted out. David worked methodically through each room, taking measurements and photographs. In the kitchen, he found exactly what Uncle Tom had predicted. The load-bearing wall Greg had removed was now supported by a single undersized beam purchased from a hardware store. It's sagging already. David pointed to a crack forming in the ceiling. Another year and you'd have serious structural failure. The second floor could have collapsed into the kitchen. He documented every modification Greg had made. Electrical work done without permits creating fire hazards. Plumbing alterations that violated code and were already leaking inside the walls. The garage conversion that had removed critical support posts. Each finding was photographed, measured, and noted in his report. By the time he finished, the list of necessary repairs ran 3 pages. Conservative estimate for bringing everything up to code and repairing the damage is $80,000. David handed me his preliminary findings. That's assuming no hidden problems once we open up the walls. Your father built this house right the first time. Undoing the damage is going to cost significantly more than the original work. I thought of Greg's gambling debts, his pawn shop sales, his 6 years of systematically stripping value from the property. He'd stolen far more than $80,000 in cash and materials, but he'd also created debt in the form of necessary repairs. The accounting Rebecca was compiling would show the full scope. That afternoon, Margaret called with the first results from the asset subpoenas. We've traced $17,000 in sales to various pawn shops and resale stores. Portuguese tiles, antique tools, custom furniture, your grandmother's jewelry collection. Greg sold everything for roughly 30 cents on the dollar, then the money disappeared into casino ATMs and sports betting accounts. Can we recover any of the items? Some of them. The pawn shops are cooperating. Several pieces haven't sold yet and can be repurchased. The tiles you already bought are just the beginning. But Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. A lot of it is gone permanently. Sold to private collectors, shipped out of state, impossible to trace. I stood in my father's workshop, now emptied of Greg's entertainment equipment, seeing the space as it had been. The pegboard where tools had hung in organized rows. The workbench scarred with decades of projects. The shelving that had held tile samples and grout mixtures. All of it could be restored, but the original tools were scattered to estate sales and online marketplaces, likely never to return. Uncle Tom found me there an hour later. I brought something. He held out a box. After your dad died, he'd loaned me some of his specialty tools. I kept meaning to return them to your mom, but then Greg showed up and I got a bad feeling. Decided to hold on to them just in case. Inside were tile nippers, scoring tools, and my father's favorite trowel, the one with his initials carved into the wooden handle. These tools had created the Portuguese bathroom, the kitchen backsplash, the entryway medallion. They'd shaped ceramic and stone into art. The final hearing came 2 weeks later. Greg appeared with Bradley Simmons, both looking defeated. The structural report had been devastating. The asset accounting had revealed systematic theft. And my mother, after consulting with her own attorney, had filed for divorce and provided testimony about Greg's financial manipulation. Judge Martinez reviewed everything with the same clinical precision he'd shown before. Mr. Paulson, you've stolen approximately $17,000 in property, created $80,000 in structural damage, and fraudulently represented yourself as sole owner on legal documents. The evidence is overwhelming and largely provided by your own permit applications and sales receipts. Greg's lawyer attempted damage control. Your Honor, my client is prepared to offer full restitution and accept responsibility for the structural repairs. With what assets? Martinez looked at the financial disclosure. Mr. Paulson has $800 in his bank account and $40,000 in gambling debts. He has no means to pay restitution or fund repairs. The judgment came swift and comprehensive. Greg was ordered to pay restitution he couldn't afford, banned from the property permanently, and charged with fraud and theft. The divorce proceedings would divide what little remained of his assets. My mother retained her ownership interest, and I retained mine, but now with court protections preventing any future fraudulent transfers. Outside the courthouse, my mother approached hesitantly. Sarah, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies. I convinced myself that Greg was right, that moving forward meant erasing your father's memory. I was wrong. You were lonely and he took advantage of that. I was weak. She looked at her hands. I let him destroy everything Michael built because I was too afraid of being alone to see what was happening. We stood in the drizzle, two women connected by blood and loss in a house that somehow still stood despite everything. The restoration would take months. The tile work would be partially recovered. The structural damage would be repaired. But some things were gone forever, and we both had to accept that. I'm returning to Seattle next week. I told her. But I'll be back every month to check on the restoration. The house will be better than before, properly protected this time. Will you forgive me? Eventually. Right now, I'm just trying to save what's left. 6 months later, the restoration was complete. Uncle Tom had overseen most of the work, hiring craftsmen who understood the original vision. The structural damage was repaired properly. The recovered Portuguese tiles were reinstalled in the master bathroom, each piece a fragment of my father's artistry brought home. The workshop was restored with the tools Uncle Tom had saved and new pieces that honored the old ones. My mother lived in the house again, this time with legal protections ensuring no future partner could manipulate her into signing away her rights. We talked weekly, rebuilding trust slowly. The divorce from Greg was final, and he'd moved to California, leaving behind debts and damage and a restraining order that would follow him for years. I stood in the restored living room, running my hand over the refinished built-in shelving. Margaret had worked with the Preservation Society to get the house recognized for its craftsman significance. Future modifications would require approval. My father's legacy was protected now, not just by sentiment but by law. Uncle Tom joined me, admiring the work. He'd be proud of what you've done here. We did it together. I looked around at the space. Dad built it the first time. We just remembered how to see what he saw. The house stood solid on Birch Lane, its foundation repaired and reinforced, its surfaces carefully restored to honor the original vision. Greg Paulson had tried to erase a craftsman's lifetime of work, but he'd underestimated the daughter who inherited her father's patience and precision. Some legacies can't be destroyed by men who see only quick profit. They endure because someone remembers how to build things that last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.